we're moving into an extension of what I talked about this morning. And that is, this morning we said that the interactive group learning was the way that I was able to introduce some of the consulting and professional experiences into the classroom. And that is called blended learning. So now I'm going to speak more about how do you prepare a syllabus for blended learning, what kind of things do you have to take into account, how do you teach the class, and then perhaps the most important part in my mind is how do you implement a method of continuous improvement, if you will, the Pdsa Cycle that is used in quality control, into the teaching of a blended class. Now, as I've indicated before, what I teach is based upon my experiences, and we talked a little bit about how we're going to get that into our classrooms. And part of the issue, of course, with a regular classroom is that it imparts knowledge. So here we might think of this lecturer sitting there trying to explain to a class how to ride a bicycle. Well, we all know that if you just transmit the knowledge associated with riding a bicycle, the first time you get on one, you're not going to be very stable. You're going to fall. So the point is that just transmitting knowledge, lecturing on it, simply does not develop the skills that are necessary to put that information into practice. So we then have that idea of how do I translate actual experiences into the classroom, or how do I get a round peg in a square hole? Now, technology is something that is amazing. It's advancing. If you think about it, in 1903, we first learned, after all the years before, how to fly. Well, in another 63 years, we landed a person on the moon. And in another 7 years later, we landed a craft on Mars. And in the year 2007, all of those things that we used, those iPhones were developed. And that iPhone had more technology, more computer power than was required to land a man on the moon. So again, technology is going up exponentially. And my point again is that the method of university teaching has not changed, while all that technology has changed exponentially. Today, in many of our classrooms, we still teach the same way that we did in 12,032, which is essentially reading a book or interpreting a book to our classes. So, exponential learning, or learning about the technologies that are advancing at an exponential pace, requires that we also utilize technology in our classroom. And I refer to the use of technology in and out of the classroom for learning as blended learning. So the question then comes up, what do we blend? On one extreme, we have the traditional lecture method. On the other extreme, we have a total technology-based learning, which is online. So these are on the extreme. And the question is, how can we combine these two in order to effectuate the best learning? And this is important because, of course, we already indicated that lecturing is not the most effective way of developing the use of skills. And perhaps we can learn some of that by using the technology to learn the skills before we go into the classroom. And we can do that by essentially doing preparing a video lecture. If you can lecture it and put it on video, then why do you have to regurgitate it to a class, to a captive audience? There's a host of things that can help us translate that knowledge to the student, and thus the Khan Academy we have MOOCs, we have the internet, and something that is coming along the way. The Chinese government has now made it a national priority that you will have intelligent tutors in all subjects. Just as you ask Alexa to turn on your computer or whatever else, or where to go, now you'll be able to talk to a statistics Alexa and have Alexa explain to you what you may not know about statistics or about linguistics or about any other subject matter. The development of these intelligent tutors is real, and it is happening today. So, what then should we substitute in a blended class in order to transmit knowledge? Well, to find the right blend, the kinds of things that we ought to put together, we have to consider a number of things. First of all, what materials are you going to do out of class? The other blend is what kind of materials are you going to use inside of the classroom? How about learning spaces? Do learning spaces have a role to play in blending this optimal learning scheme? And how about the role of the students? In this kind of a blended environment, the role of the student is quite different from the passive role of the student just sitting back and writing notes or taking pictures or do whatever it is that they do today to absorb the knowledge. We also have to talk about the role of the instructor. When you have this kind of a method, the instructor is not the transmitter of knowledge anymore. And furthermore, the question then also comes up about what technologies are you going to use for what. So all of these things come into play when you prepare the syllabus for a blended course. When you put a blended course, you better know what you're going to do with each of those ingredients. Now, once you have the syllabus, then we're going to teach the course, okay, using that particular syllabus with the best available knowledge to us of what it is that we want to put into this pot that we call blended learning. Now, once you teach the course, then we normally go home and say, okay, I'm teaching again. I got good student evaluations or not, and I'll see what I can do about it. Well, what I'm proposing here is that when you get the results, you measure these results, and that you then act upon your measures to improve the kind of blend. Put some new ingredients in there to improve it the next time around. So here you have a feedback loop, as we all may be familiar with. Now, this feedback loop translates into what we refer to as the Pdsa Circle, and that is simply a continual process of developing the course syllabus, teaching the course, measuring the results, and then developing a better syllabus to apply the next time around. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. And we also should understand that even though you measure the results of any particular offering of the course, your results are not going to be guaranteed because you're dealing with different populations of students, different kinds of issues. So over the long run, you're going to be improving, but in the short run, you may have bumps, ups and downs. So you have a process of continual improvement, meaning a long-range improvement in the course, but not necessarily one of continuous, which means always improving. You're not always going to improve. You're going to have bumps in the road somewhere along the line. Now, in order to implement blended learning, let's talk about, first of all, what we're going to do out of class in the class and the role of the instructor. Well, at this point, I'm going to say, look, I cannot tell you that what I do will work for you. And I can tell you what you do is not going to work for a blended environment. We all do things differently, and we all take what each other does with a grain of salt, and we have our own teaching, learning styles. So I'm going to share with you what it is that I do, and then I'm going to go into something that applies to all of us, regardless of how you deliver the blended environment. So first of all, we have to define the structure of a blended course. And in order to do that, you really need to transform your regular class lecture into what I would refer to as interesting self-contained learning modules with specific, accessible learning objectives that are accessible to students anytime and anywhere. In other words, make your course available anywhere to the student. Don't make the student come to your classroom to listen to you spot out information while they are texting and messaging and doing other things. Secondly, you should transform your homework into challenging active learning assignments. You should form students into groups, and you should engage groups in interactive group learning. And when I say you should, that's what I do. You may not choose to do that, but for me, this has worked for the type of courses that I teach. Now, what that means is out of class, students are basically going to be learning by reading the assignments, watch the video lectures, verify that they have met the learning objectives, have been accomplished. Then, and this is required, or I require that they do this before they come to class. Now, when they come to class, then we're going to, every class essentially consists of answer questions about the material. In other words, you have learned it. Now, any loose ends, anything that makes you think that you have not learned the material. Then we go into, I make the problem available to my groups, and then I let them learn from each other, as we discussed earlier, through collaboration. And then, once a team has collaborated and they think that they have achieved the correct solution, then they will get an individual, each student will get an individual exam, and as soon as they have their exam finished, then they're free to go home. So there's a great incentive for students to come prepared so that they can get through, do their problem, do their exam, and get out. And once students get into a groove, then many times students already come in, prepared, take the exam, and are out of the class in 15 minutes. So they have that incentive to get that free time. So the more time they spend out of class preparing, the less time they spend in class. Now, out of class learning materials, what I have done is I've prepared reading files and assignments, and I reported in our conference here a couple of years ago on what those particular reading files would look like. We call them Socratic reading materials because they are written in such a way that is like a student who has sort of a dry sense of humor, asking questions to the instructor, relevant questions about the material, and the instructor delivering the answer to these questions, so that students are essentially reading a dialogue between Socrates, if you will, and themselves. And this seems to go over very, very well. Of course, I have done that because, as we said this morning, I don't think textbooks are written for students. Textbooks are written by professors for other professors to buy and for the publisher to sell, because the professor dictates what the student is going to use for the class. Okay, what do I use as out-of-class learning materials? As I've indicated, video lectures, and they can take any form. If you have PowerPoint, then you can have a narrated PowerPoint. Any PowerPoint has a narration, and you can basically just go through and present your slides just as I'm doing now. You can hear exactly what I'm saying, and your students can hear exactly what your lecture would look like. I use Saba Meeting if I want to interact live with students, or Tegrity. Those are software schemes. So if I want to have a live sessions, then I can use these particular technologies. And for recording my lectures, I use a product called Camtasia. It's by TechSmith, and it's a great product for recording lecture. You can insert quizzes, you can edit back and forth, and it's fairly easy to use. The external sources that I use for my classes are YouTube, Khan Academy, and MOOCs, as we mentioned. And the in-class learning materials I prepared on the basis of my experiences. Then I used essentially these experiences as inspiration to develop these daily exercises that students work on. Now, what characteristics do I have for my in-class learning materials? First of all, it serves to develop individual mastery of learning objectives. In other words, when you are reading and acquiring knowledge, you are trying to meet certain learning objectives, and my materials for in-class are designed to test whether you have achieved those learning objectives. Basically, what I do in class requires that students have done their homework, if you will, acquired the knowledge that is required, and it basically is complicated. What I can assign to a team of students can be several levels more difficult than if I make individual assignments. Why? Because students can help each other, they can discuss, and they come together. And I want it to be complicated so they have a reason to essentially work together and collaborate. The purpose of the collaboration is not to do something as a team, not to divide labor and then put it together, but it's for everybody to learn. And the end of the class is dictated by your individual mastery of the subject matter. So you've learned your groups or you've used your group to learn the subject matter as an individual. And then at the end of every period, I have a quiz. Basically, have you mastered the material? And I do that at the end, because if I don't have a quiz at the end, then students are not going to be ready. They're going to wait till the next time to study. So at the end of every day, there is a quiz. By the way, how do I do the quiz? All my quizzes are computer-based. So they're essentially questions from a question bank. Students answer, the computer grades it. So I don't have to grade those things each and every day. And I know that if you think you had to do that, or if I had to do it manually, that would be a tremendous work. But it takes a lot of work to put together these question banks. And can I put question banks together on advanced optimization, advanced statistics? Yes, I can. We all can. So that's the way we play. Let's talk a little bit about learning spaces. Can students collaborate in any learning spaces? Well, traditional in our university, we have these tiered lecture halls that students can sit and look down. Well, those are not conducive to working as group. They are inhibitors to group learning. So what I have here is perhaps the simplest form of a learning space that we have. And it's nice to have a large screen in which you project what the students are doing. The large screen is hooked to one of the students' computer, and I make my students work collaboratively to that computer so I can see what they are doing. So I can walk around as a coach in the field and see when somebody is doing the right things, and if they are not doing the right things, then I interject myself and I do some coaching. It's nice to have rollers because I allow my students not only to work within the group, but they can work with anybody they want to. So if the group is having a problem, somebody wants to roll their chair, they can roll somewhere else and interact with somebody else in the class. What I had before was the economical version. This is the luxury version of that same kind of a learning space. And again, here you see we have the individual learning stations, individual group of students, and I can circulate through there and see what they are doing and whether they're on track or whether they're not on track. It's World Cup. I like football, so I use some football examples. But the role of the student out of class is the same as the role of a football player when they're not on the practice field. They can do individual ball exercises, they can do weightlifting and do all of those things that are required in order to perform well on the field. You have to do those individual things. So my students have to read the lecture notes, watch the video lectures, and do practice assignments individually, just as a football player has to go to the gym, do conditioning exercises and practice exercises individually. Then I require the equivalent of on-field preparation. So in-class preparation consists of interactive group learning, whereas in soccer it would be in practicing with your teammates on the field. And you have to demonstrate competence. Have you done your individual exercises? Have you practiced with your team? And are you now, have you acquired the skills that are necessary to perform well in a match? Okay, what is my role? Well, my role is not to lecture. My role is to serve as a consultant or a learning coach, just as we do in football. And one of my rules is, if I know what I want to say to the class, I don't. I record it so that they can watch it, and I have that time free to be a learning coach or consultant. Now, in being a learning coach, just like a coach in football on the field, I walk around and I watch what my teams are doing. And I do that by looking at the large screen video screens that I have so I can see where they are and what they're doing. And if I see anybody going wrong, then I correct them right there. And then if I see somebody that has particular difficulty with something, then I pull that student apart, just like a coach may do with a football player, and give them saying, hey, do you know what you're doing? And give them some specific individual instructions. Okay, Instructional Technologies. Our learning platform is Blackboard. Our collaboration platform is Saba Meeting. We're moving to Tegrity, a similar type product. My video recording that I like to use is Pdsa Studio, and then I use Qualtrics to collect a lot of the data that you will see later on. Qualtrics is a commercial survey package. Okay, the key ingredient, however, to doing any of this is to collaborate and to be an effective collaborator. And as Steve Jobs says, great things in business are never done by one person. They are done by a team of people. And that is true whether you talk about Apple or Google or Amazon or any of those phenomenal companies that have arisen. Now, the other thing that I face is I do not want you to focus on learning for a grade. Because if you learn for a grade, you study for the test. You don't study to learn the overall concepts. So whereas studying for a test may get you a good grade, it does not necessarily mean you've learned the material effectively. So I like to focus not competition between students, but collaboration. One of the first things I have to explain to them, which is alien to many of them, is that my goal in the class is for everybody to earn an A. That is my goal. And if I get everyone to make an A in my course, then I, as an instructor, have succeeded. When I say make an A, I said earn an A. So that is my goal. So I do not care at the end of the course how many people have A's, B's, or C's. And the fewer A's I have, the more of a failure I consider myself. Because my job is to teach students, not to flunk them. Okay, collaboration, not competition. Again, as I indicated, we want teams to work together. We want them to help each other get good grades. And just because somebody gets a good grade, that doesn't mean that somebody else is going to get a bad grade. The more good grades, the better it is going to be. Okay, in order to achieve effective collaboration, we use collaboration as a means to an end. We don't give group grades. We only on semester-long type projects we give group grades. But for all the other activities, no group grades. And the other thing that is required for effective collaboration, something that we mentioned this morning, is that students simply do not know in general how to collaborate effectively. They're not naturally high-performance teams. So we provide some upfront 2 weeks of effective team technique that includes a review of key concepts, including teamwork abilities, what it takes to be a good teamwork, different relationship between leadership and followership, and the fact that in a team sometimes somebody has to be a leader, somebody has to be a follower, and some other times somebody else is a leader and somebody else is a follower. It's a shared leadership concept that we try to influence, not the idea of I'm the leader and you're going to do it and you're going to do what I tell you to. That doesn't work, because then everybody's going to do what you tell them to, and you miss the richness of diversity of opinions that go towards creating ingenuity and innovation. And then we develop team charters, which is the contractual way that the teams are going to work together. So we are developing teaming skills concurrently with subject matter skills during the course. And this morning we already showed that you had, or this morning, seems like this morning, this afternoon, where our students out of class learn the material. They come in class. If they can work with the team and learn the material, that they can take the quiz and are out of there. If they need my help, I can work with a team. And if somebody in particular still has trouble, then I work with an individual for individual tutoring. Again, that is essentially what I call need-based learning. I focus my attention on those that need it most, as opposed to treating everybody the same and giving the same information. Well, that's what I do. And you may say, yeah, I like this, I don't like this, I don't do it this way. That's fine. You can do it any way you want to. This has worked for me. It has worked very well for me. But what I think will work for all of us is that, first of all, understand that there's no one way to blending a class, but the key to being able to improve something is to be able to measure it. So we need to learn how to measure the outcomes of the course so we can use that as a basis for improvement. Okay. Now, again, when you first try blending your course, if you go to the literature, everything that is blended is wonderful. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been published. There is no journal that publishes unsuccessful research, nor bad results in blended research. But we can learn a lot from that. So again, don't worry about whether your results are good the first time or not. That doesn't matter. What does matter is that regardless of where you are initially, if you know how you did and why, then you can improve that. Basic principle. What do we measure? Well, one of the key measures or one of the key theories that we use, which was developed by Dr. Michael G. Moore, who is the editor of a number of journals and world famous, is the theory of transactional distance. And basically that simply says that even if you don't see each other when you're dealing online, you can feel closer to some people than to others, as evidenced by the fact that every 7 marriages is started online. You can feel closer to some people than others. That's not a physical, but it's what they call a transactional distance, the way you relate. And the transactional distances, which I have interpreted as being the obstacles to a student engagement with learning, those obstacles can arise because the relationship between students and students, classmates, between the relationship between teacher and students, they can arise because the student just can't deal with the material, or they can deal with the instructional technology. These are the main constructs that give rise to obstacles to effective engagement to learning by students. If you can't get responses from your fellow classmates, if your teacher doesn't respond to you and provide you feedback, if you hate the stuff that you're dealing with, or if you don't understand the technology, all of those things inhibit your ability to learn. So what we do is we realize that any situation gives rise to a certain transactional distance, and the end results of those transactional distances, or the outcomes, are essentially learning, progress towards learning, and satisfaction. And all three of those are intimately correlated. So if you use one, then it also does the other. All three of these things are basically the same thing, statistically speaking, and corroborated by us and many others. Well, how they are measured? Well, we go out, and at the end of every semester, I have my students fill out a questionnaire, which is fairly simple. The questionnaire that I use is called the Scale of Transactional Distance, and was published by Monica Zhang in 2003. She did a fantastic job of trying to quantify all of these things, but the main factors are the transactional distance between student and student. There's 11 elements in that. If you look at measuring the transactional distance between students and students, these are the constructs that are involved in that particular factor. And we have that for each of the 4 factors that we'll deal with. You can read this, but the point is, this is essentially the instrument that we use, the scale of transactional distance. And for each of the questions, for each of the elements that you have, we ask factors we would have to focus on to make changes. The question is, which of these factors has the greatest impact, statistically speaking, on student satisfaction? Well, we did that by doing a regression analysis, and what we found out, if you look at the significance factors, that there were 2 factors that provided a significant impact on student satisfaction: the transactional distance between student and teacher, and the transactional distance between students and the material content. So now we know where we got problems. We got problems in those 2. So now we want to focus on which one we're going to fix. And now what we decided to do is to focus on transactional distance between student and the teacher, simply on the hypothesis that we could have a better chance to make changes to the teacher than to the content of the course, since that was prescribed by the curriculum. So we focus on how to improve but the transactional distance between student and teacher, and these were the elements under that factor, and we looked at them and we said, hey, let's look at the worst ones. And the worst ones are the students that did not receive prompt feedback from the instructor, and also the students felt that the instructor was not available to answer questions. So this gives us a diagnostic. This tells us, hey, the reason you got a lousy rating, so to speak, is because you don't give a quick feedback and you're not available to answer questions. So can you fix that? Why, yeah, I can fix that. All right, well, let's fix that. So we went ahead and we said these were the diagnostics that we had, and then these are the remedies that she decided to apply. And again, there's not very difficult things to do. Provide prompt feedback and make sure you answer students' questions. So she did that, and that then essentially completed the first cycle. We essentially came up with things that we needed to implement the next time in the next iteration of the cycle. So this is the first cycle. Now we go in the second cycle. We are essentially decided what we're going to change in the syllabus. We taught the course, and now we went and essentially collected the data. And when we collected the data, lo and behold, things did improve. As a matter of fact, everything now improved in the transactional distances. Remember, the red line is your blended class. The blue line, it's a traditional class. So she improved her performance or her transactional distances significantly by being able to diagnose exactly where the problems were, fix them, and apply them. So here again, we say, well, how can we improve further? Well, we can do the same thing. We can look at the transactional distances. We can run the regression again. And now the regression says that you have 3 factors that significantly impact satisfaction. And now she can go ahead and decide how she's going to fix those in the same way that we did for the first cycle of the PDSA. And consequently, that then would complete our second circle, and not a third one, and then the fourth one. And again, the thing to watch for is that it's a process of continual improvement. She started out badly, she improved. What happens next? We're not sure, but we hope it's going to improve. And what were the results? Somebody asked the question, what are the results? And the measurable results that we had was that the mean improved by almost 13 points, the average final grade for the students. The difference between the range between the highest and the lowest grade went from 82 points to 34 points. So again, we have this effect of students helping students reduce the variability in the grades that you have. More students did better than ever before because of the process that we utilized. Here, simply students saying that, and these were voluntary statements, and I have a pile of statements way big from students responding very positively to this course. So now the question is, this is what we do. Do they all like blended learning? And what's the answer to that? No, they don't. So we went in and we said, okay, we found between the year 2013 and 2015, from a total of 234 students, 206 would recommend the course to their friends. And again, we consider that a measure of satisfaction. It was one that was suggested by the Sloan Foundation. Student satisfaction can be measured by their willingness to recommend the course to a friend. So we had basically 28 that would not, and that did not make me happy because almost 12% would not. So we went and tried to explore why, and we conducted focus groups from the students in the class, and we analyzed the focus groups, and the basic result was that everybody knew what it took to be successful in this course. There were some students that just didn't want to do it. Hell no, I'm not going to collaborate. No, I'm not going to get ready for class. So again, not everybody liked it. One of the reasons why they didn't like it is because we had not initiated the team collaboration, and this, we felt that being able to provide the team training at the beginning of the course might help this. And that's it. By the way, all of this is in my book. That here's the reference to it if you have an interest.